Well, hey, Roger. This is Bill Loughrige, and I am with the Tempe Historical Society doing this interview with Connected Tempe. And I'm glad you agreed to do this. And the way I do interviews, obviously I don't have any notes in front of me. You and I sit around. I should probably sit in that chair. You stand behind me with your clippers. And then we
That's
can
where
talk.
I'm more comfortable with conversation.
So, Roger, you've been in the haircutting business in Tempe for many, many years, and you've had many people pass through your chair. Plus, you grew up in Tempe after a certain age. When did you come to Tempe?
1957.
And you were how old?
I was in third grade, so that's about 7,
Okay.
I guess, 8 maybe at the most.
So where did you move from?
Nebraska,
What, a big town, little town?
small town, 690 people, little farming town.
And who were your parents?
My parents were George Gil, and my mother's name was Frances. My dad had 2 years of college at the University of Nebraska, and then World War II interrupted that. He was in the service. He was in World War II and activated in the Korean War. Came back to and then married my mother, had 2 children, and found himself working in his dad's little grocery store in that town. And about 1955, he decided to finish his college education, and my grandparents, his parents, had started wintering in Tempe, Arizona. And they said, there's a school out there. He was getting into education. There's a school out there where you don't have to shovel snow, so you don't have to go to Lincoln if you don't want to. And he came out and checked it out, and so they actually arranged for him to come out and visit, and he decided pretty quick that this is going to be home. So he finished his college career at Arizona State when it wasn't university status yet. It was Arizona State College. I don't think it became university until 58 or 9.
Yeah. I think the election was in 58, but 59 is when
Yeah.
it began.
So that brought us out here.
So he was working in the family business in
Yes.
Lincoln. Is that where?
Well, the town was Winnebago, Nebraska, but
Winnebago.
University was the northeast corner of Nebraska. I was actually born in Sioux City, Iowa, but Winnebago was so small there was no hospital, so you went across the river into Iowa to the hospital.
And Winnebago was no small name either.
Yeah, well, yeah. There's actually a Winnebago Indian reservation right there. That's where
Right.
that got its name. Yeah.
Okay. Did your mother work, or she was at the time?
She worked at Arizona State while he went back to school. He was there on GI Bill, and she worked for Alfred Thomas in admissions at ASU, and she was kind of the breadwinner till he finished his schooling, and then when he finished schooling, his first job was at a new grade school, Holdeman Elementary. It was a new school in the early '60s when he finally started teaching. Then he went to Gilliland and taught at the junior high. Then he went to a high school in Phoenix after he got another degree or 2, and taught at a school called Phoenix Indian. It was a boarding school for Indian kids that came off the reservation, and then from there he went to Arizona State and taught the last 20 years in the College of Education. So he went grade school through junior high, high school, and college. And that temporary job for my mom ended up being 35 years at ASU. So she continued on, and so their careers were basically at the university. And so we grew up down. We first lived here on Cedar Street in Tempe, just off of Spence, and our backyard butted up to the railroad tracks and Melco Haney's feedlot. There was a feedlot right behind us. And
Do you remember the address on Cedar Street?
1605 East Cedar Street. Cedar Street dead end, about 5 or 6 houses down.
Okay.
And just beyond that was the old B&B Brock and Brock had their salvage.
Jerry Brock.
Jerry Brock, one of my customers. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So when you moved first to Tempe, you lived on Cedar Street.
Cedar Street.
In what is Hudson Manor?
Hudson Manor.
Okay.
And then we lived the longest after we were there about 2 years. Then we were on the corner of 10th and Farmer, which is 305 West 10th Street. If you went down off of Mill Avenue on 10th Street, where the Dairy Queen used to be, when you hit Farmer, you had to stop, either make a right or left. We were the corner house there, and that's where we lived up until 1964. So that was our primary residence, was down on Farmer and 10th.
And then in '64, where did you move to?
Moved to a new subdivision out here, Canal Homes over through here, and Suggs were built in the 60s. In 1964, my folks bought a home just blocks from the barber shop.
Is that the house you still own?
Uh-huh.
What's the address of that house?
1144 East Bishop. My grandsons live there that work at the barber shop.
Right. So it's a family affair.
Yeah.
So when you were a kid, when you first got here, what did you find as a 7-year-old?
Well, first of all, it was larger than Winnebago, but it didn't take long to make friends. And I guess our first organized events in those days, we didn't play soccer and what have you, but usually Little League baseball. So the memories of being down at Tempe Beach at the ballpark down there for D-League and the swimming pool when Tempe Beach had the pool, those were kind of recreation areas. So that's where you connected with a lot of kids, no matter where they lived in town. It seemed like everybody kind of was down. That was kind of the recreation area of Tempe. So back when you could ride a bicycle around and not worry about it, and well, when we went downtown I don't care if you went to the drugstore or the Boston store or the drugstore, everything was downtown. And fast food in those days was probably Pete's Fish and Chips. We didn't have Jack in the Box and Burger Kings yet.
So what do you remember about where you went to eat? Now you're talking about when you were a teenager.
Well, as we got a little older,
right?
But we still lived on 10th and Farmer,
right?
And
which is downtown.
Yeah, and so we well, there wasn't much variety of food in Pete's Fish and Chips. Everything was fried. Everything went into a deep fryer.
Where was Pete's Fish and Chips?
It was on Mill Avenue, just south of University and
which was 8th
Mill.
Street.
Which was 8th Street.
At the time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Originally 8th Street, because until ASU became University, it was 8th Street. Yeah.
But then you lived for 2 years on Cedar Street.
Cedar Street.
And you rode back and forth from there on your bike.
Mm-hmm.
But you weren't playing baseball in those 7, 8, 9-year-old.
D-League was probably about, well, it was more going to Tempe Beach and being in park stuff like that, in the swimming pool and what have you. Little League was probably more like, it was prior to going to junior high, but it might have been like 5th and 6th grade.
Right.
Because we kind of went from, I remember Tempe Beach to Clark Park to, a lot of it was called American Legion ball in those days.
Well, describe Tempe Beach and what was going on at the swimming pool there. What did the building look like?
Well, I remember there was a rock formation of it in the front. At least part of it was kind of a river rock type of thing, and it was right across from Monty's, of course. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like everybody that you knew was at Tempe Beach in the summertime.
So what was the process of going swimming? What did you do when you got there?
What was the process?
Yeah, you go in, you buy a ticket.
Yeah. I don't remember exactly what the cost was. It didn't cost very much.
Not much.
It didn't cost much.
You changed clothes.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And what'd you do with your clothes?
I can't remember if there was a locker or not, or where we
put them in a basket.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't remember there being a locker, but yeah. So
what were the rules in the beach, in the pool?
Well, the rules, I don't know that we violated many rules. We probably acted up a little bit, but I don't know that we had to be informed of. You obviously didn't want people running and.
Could you go to the deep end?
Initially, I couldn't.
Why not?
Well, initially I wasn't that good a swimmer, to be honest with you.
So what was the deal? How did you finally get to go to the deep end?
We took some swimming lessons.
You had to be able to swim across the pool.
Uh-huh.
That was the rule,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
And no running and no eating on the concrete.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. I don't remember who the lifeguards would have been. I do remember at the ballpark a gentleman by the name of Joe Parks, who was a local teacher, did a lot of recreation things. He probably was in college at the time. We were so young. I can even remember the umpires, Bob Franco, who was a teacher, and Mr. Gamboa. They were just there all the time, and they couldn't have made much money, but they sure were devoted to those recreation programs down there. But that was basically where we spent most of our time, other than some of the sports that we had at school. Where I went to elementary. I went to Broadmoor. See, from Cedar, we were bused over to Broadmoor. We might have been a little bit closer to Ritter School. It was about the same maybe, but Broadmoor was a new school, and I think they needed students. That's why they bused us out there, because it was a new school. And Mr. Sperkelli was my fourth grade teacher.
I was going to ask about Joe.
Yeah, and then he later became principal, of course, and across the street. And I still have two teachers from McCamey Junior High, Mr. Babcock and Mr. Jeans, in their 90s that still come in the barbershop. And I've cut their hair for decades, and I can't call one of them Bob, and I can't call one of them Carl. You know, it's Mr. Babcock. But so, you know, Tempe was smaller then. You know, movie theater downtown was another recreational thing. Valley Art. Laird's drugstore. Drugstores in those days had a fountain, so you could go get a ice cream or whatever. Things were simpler. I was 5 minutes late because it didn't used to take 10 minutes to get from rural to southern today. On up here, Rural Road was a pretty narrow rural road in those days. In fact, when we lived on Cedar Street in the mid '50s, there was nothing south of us. You had back on any feedlot and empty fields. So.
I think Canel's development was the early development.
Yeah.
So when your first family moved here, what church did you go to?
Presbyterian Church.
And where was it?
Well, the Presbyterian Church that I remember going to the most was the one that's still there on Alameda, but it had to be, prior to that, it had to be downtown, so I'm not sure. No. Oh, I know what. We were a Baptist for a short period of time because we lived for one short semester on the corner of Mill Avenue, transitioning from Cedar to 10th Street on Hudson Lane, which was a short street, and Mill. We lived upstairs from the American Baptist minister. They ended up building a American Baptist Church over on, was it Priest? Probably wasn't that, probably Hardy. And while Dad was studying for probably his master's at that point, he would send us down because the temporary church was downstairs at the house. So we were Baptist for a while, so Dad wanted to stay in good with the landlord. And then we actually rode with the minister over to Hardy when the church got built. So we didn't have a lot of choice of that. So I guess that's why I kind of forgot about, I think, where the Presbyterian Church was, because we were Baptist for a short period of time, and then over to the, I think it's University Presbyterian.
Do you remember the name of the pastor?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't. He was the first pastor in that new church, and I'm assuming that church is still over on Hardy. American Baptist, somewhere between 13th on the east side of Hardy, but it was, they never got a large building built, but I'm just assuming I don't get to that neighborhood much anymore.
Well, you mentioned Mill Avenue. Can you describe what was going on Mill Avenue as you remember it, and what the different businesses were there, and which ones you frequented for what?
Well, it was, I remember going down with my dad. There was always some sort of little project, even though we rented for several years. You go down to Tempe Hardware, and you could get anything in that hardware store. They had those ladders that would go up, and they'd have boxes clear up there. And I think it was the Perry brothers, I believe it was, that had had it, and they knew where every little, if you needed one of something, they knew right where it was up there. They'd roll those ladders down, go up and get them. The hardware store, if you went down for a haircut, barbershops were kind of downtown. There was.
Well, we'll talk about the barbershops in a little bit here, because we have to kind of sort that out.
I think. But Dairy Queen was about the only item like that. Tempe Center was just new.
Mm-hmm.
So it had a little more development through there because you had
The El Rancho Market.
El Rancho, where I worked when I was in high school,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a Grant's there. There was a Ryan Evans drugstore. It was the first real center in
Mm-hmm.
Tempe, but things were still downtown. You
Go
down to
you mentioned
Boston
the Boston
store.
And what was in the Boston store?
Well, my folks shopped there. I don't remember ever buying anything there, to be honest with you.
Levi's.
But my folks did, so that's where some of that was.
Okay.
And we would use the theater, of course. There was two banks. I believe it was the First National Bank, and I think there was the Bank of Douglas, were the two banks, which later became the Arizona Bank, I believe. And so we did a lot of things that went to Arizona State football games, but they were played in Goodwin Stadium in those days.
Which is where?
On corner of College and Apache. It's a parking structure now on the northeast corner. And so we'd go, and there were track meets there. In fact, at Tempe High, when I got to high school, we played our football games there because we didn't have a lighted field. We played on Friday nights. And so, in fact, that's where I met my wife. It was in high school, and she was from Gilbert, of all places, at that location. But
And what was her name?
her name's Eva. Her maiden name was Marcus, and I didn't have a clue as to where in the world Gilbert, Arizona was. And a buddy of mine was dating her, and he said, "Roger, I don't know if I got enough gas to get her home." He said, "She lives in Gilbert," and I said, "I've heard of it. Where is it?" He said, "It's too far for this relationship to continue." So I saw an opening and I took it. Well, I said, "Let me at least get her phone number and I'll find out where it is." But so everything was kind of down in that area back in those days. You know, we didn't have damage yet on the curve. But
what was in that area where Gamage was? Do you remember?
There was some form of housing, and I believe it might have been something to do with the university. It might have been, I don't know if it was married couples that had housing there or what was in there, but there was some sort of form of housing there.
GI Bill students.
Yeah.
Older students.
We'd ride our bikes up and watch them blasting that mountain to build the football stadium where Sun Devil Stadium is now.
So there was a little store called Sella Sporting Goods.
So
did you ever go in there?
I went in there. My last customer of the day today was Mark Sella, the son of Joe Sella.
Right. You
could go in that Sella's and you could find anything. If you needed a trophy, if you needed a hat, a ball, a bat, a jersey, a Cub Scout or Boy Scout, that little store had everything in it. Mr. and Mrs. Sella, yeah.
How about Nevitz Richfield? Did you go
Nevitz was, I believe, on the west side of Mill Avenue, a little further.
Across the street from the Sella.
Yeah. Was that 7th or 6th? The 7th. I guess it was right across, just to the south, wasn't it? Yeah. Harrelson Insurance, I believe, was down through there. What else? There was a shoe store of some sort. Shoe repair shop down there. I can't remember what the name of it was, but
I think that shop is still at Broadway and Mill. That family.
Yeah.
I think. I don't know for sure. Okay, so now you got through high school. You graduated. What year did you graduate from
1966.
high school? And you graduated from McClintock, right?
Tempe High. No, don't say that. But you know, there was transition then because McClintock was there, but it didn't have a senior class. So class of 66 was the, I guess what you might say the last unified Tempe High, because in 67, McClintock finally had a graduating class. So a lot of kids started at Tempe High, but transitioned to McClintock and graduated there because their first senior class was 67. And I think the rural road was pretty much the dividing line. If you lived east of rural, you'd be McClintock district. West, you were Tempe. We had 500 and some in our graduating class, so we definitely needed a second high school.
Right.
A gentleman was in the shop today that's the dean. I didn't know they had dean of students at the high school, but he's the dean of students. He said there are about 300 to 320 graduates now at Tempe High, so we probably were near the peak and graduating, because waiting for McClintock to take some of the load. Mr. Boyle was the principal, and so.
I forgot to mention in our ask earlier, did you have brothers and sisters?
I've got one brother, no sisters. One brother that was a year ahead of me in school. Okay. His name's Randy. Mm-hmm.
So did he graduate from Tempe High as well then?
Class of 65, 1 year ahead of me.
Is he still in the area?
Yes, he lives in Mesa, but he still connects with a lot of people, because we've stayed with a lot of friends have stayed in the Tempe area, so we still see them. Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, we'll get to the fact that you live in Mesa too, but I mean, you graduated from high school, and then what did you do?
Well, senior year of high school, at one of those awards situations at the gym, one of my best buddies, his name was Benny Guerra, he got a scholarship to barber school. And it surprised him and surprised us, because our plans were either go to this new community college called Mesa or to Arizona State, where I could have gone pretty reasonable, since my folks, my mom was there at the time, and so it surprised us that, and he said he honestly, to this day, he said, I don't remember even applying for a scholarship. I must have done it with a counselor my sophomore year. Nothing changes. We're going to college. Nobody knew what they were going to do, but we're going to college. And I think what happened with Benny is he went home and he saw there was some value to this. They checked into it, and his folks said, you know what? You guys are going to have to work while you're in college to doing something. And I was carrying out groceries at El Rancho. He was working and bussing tables at Chico's Mexican restaurant on Apache, and he came over to the house one night and he said, Roger, what do you think about being a barber? Well, I said, I thought you said you weren't going to even do anything with that. Then he gave me a spill, I think, and he says, you know what, if we go full time, we can be done in less than a year, still go to college, and we can cut hair someplace instead of bussing tables or carrying out groceries. Sounded good, so Benny went to Roger's house. Roger and Benny went to Greg's house. And the three of us went to Jim's house. And the four best buddies, about 2 weeks later, were in barber college.
Greg who?
Luna was his last name.
And the other one?
His dad actually was a barber. I'm surprised he wasn't planning on it. His dad worked for Harold Cope when Cope had a shop down on 7th Street and Mill on the east side. And so off we go to barber college in the summer of '66, weeks after graduating from high school, and went full time. Carpooled from here, and the barber school in Phoenix in those days was right where Phoenix Suns Arena is now, 1st Street and Jefferson. And we finished school, and Vietnam was escalating during those years, and the biggest concern was that you're probably going to be going to service no matter what. There was a student deferment for a period of time, then that went away, and so we were expecting to maybe get drafted even after that, and we lucked out that we didn't. We got high numbers in that lottery that came out, and so Benny went to work in someplace in Phoenix. He bounced around 4 or 5 times. I ended up right across the street from the high school that I graduated from, right at Mill and Broadway. About 8 months after I finished high school, I was cutting hair across the street. Didn't have any customers, but I was at Broadway Plaza, where Art Livingston had a grocery store, and there was drugstore. I can't remember what the drugstore name was. Independent drugstore in the center. And
That shoe shop is in there now.
yeah, that little center is still there.
Yeah.
And then a gentleman. There was the shopping center at Broadway and Rural was a new shopping center, and a gentleman that worked in that barber shop could not get along with his employer that well, and he knew my boss that I went to work for.
What was his name?
My boss's name was Tom Candelaria, and the gentleman that had the shop up here was first Paul Carrier, and then it was Larry Little. But there was a personality clash, and I remember Gene, the barber from up here, came down to our shop, and he's indicated he would like to work there. And he told me, he said, you know what, son, I think he was trying to do me a favor because I was 18 years old and pretty green. He said, the shop down there is a nice shop. It's a new shopping center. If you could work for that man, it's a good enough location. And so I went down and actually checked it out and went to work for Mr. Little. So we essentially traded jobs. He stayed at that shop and retired, and 56 years later, I'm still at this shop. So it worked out for both of us. And through those doors, over those years, have passed some of the people that you've heard me talk about. So
Sure. Well, let's talk about. I want to finish up with the barber shops. I want to go back a little bit. I hate to do this. We talked about Mill Avenue. What about Apache Boulevard as you were growing up? What were the businesses along Apache Boulevard?
Apache Boulevard to the east, Crawford's Furniture Store. My dad, working in his dad's grocery store, actually went to work for a small little independent grocery store called Bostwick's, which later became Jim Superette. And he worked in
what side of the store was that in?
Bostwick's was on the east, on the north side. Where I don't remember the street that went in Hudson Manor off of Apache there.
Right.
But it was on that side. Crawford's Furniture would have been to the west of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think some of the streets back in there were Butte and
Butte. That's on the north side.
So he worked there, but then Jim Superette came in, and then the store was moved over to the other side.
There was a Bayless store there.
Bayless was to the west. Bayless was there again, not quite the size of Tempe Center, but it had multiple shops in there. Next to that was Harmon's, which was the big barn that had the big lion in a cage next to it, I remember. That probably wouldn't have worked today, because that cage was, as I recall, it was entertaining to us as kids, and as we got older. That cage wasn't any too big for that lion. He didn't have much room to move around in there.
The size of this area you're sitting in, right?
And so, but it was probably the first Kentucky Fried Chicken it converted into, but it was a big barn.
Right.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Moore's Nursery. You remember Moore's Nursery across the street?
That was on the opposite side.
The south side.
John Moore.
John Moore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Place we hung out in high school was a place called the UDI on the corner of Apache, where it's called the Moxie now. It was prior to that was a Holiday Inn. That was the hangout. That was like happy days where you went and just hung out. Didn't spend much money, but you hung out and saw all your friends there after a movie or a ball game or something.
You mentioned something else as Chico's.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're the first person I've talked to that has really mentioned that voluntarily, just spontaneously. What was Chico's?
Mexican restaurant right at the corner of Terrace, right where the light rail cuts down off of Apache now. Mm-hmm. It was on that corner. A gentleman by the name of Louis Bastillo. Bastillo family owned it in those days. And there wasn't much choice on Mexican food. I don't know if Chico's came prior to Rosita's, but those are really the only two Mexican restaurants. And Rosita's in those days was on West 5th Street. I think there was a Wright's Market or something down there in that area off of 5th back then. But I knew Chico's better. Rosita's, as far as me going, was a little bit later. But Chico's wasn't a lot of, we didn't grow up with pizza in those days as kids. I was in high school when pizza that Village Inn Pizza, which became the Vine lately,
mm-hmm.
That recently closed. It's gonna for redevelopment,
And
I
there was
guess.
a Shakey's
There was a Shakey's out there
by the bank.
So I didn't grow up with pizza as a kid. We didn't have that. I'm not saying you couldn't get a pizza in Phoenix or someplace, but we didn't have pizza parlors per se until I was in high school.
Well, Chico's was actually one of the few restaurants in town, Mexican or otherwise, right? They had cafes.
Yes.
Do you remember the cafe that was on Apache on the north side that had the train in it that would deliver your food?
Oh,
You remember what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about, but I can't remember the name.
Okay.
I don't remember.
No.
Yeah.
And
That was unique.
And there were trailer parks, along.
Quite a-
Yeah.
Had the Wigwam,
Right.
which was back to Apache and Rural, just west of that was, those were unique. It was in one once. We never stayed, but somebody let us go in just for the uniqueness of going in and seeing those. Then of course the Dome Bank came later, Valley National Bank, which was kind of a unique design for its time.
Do you remember the name Benny Hines? You know who?
Benny Hines was a banker there.
Yeah.
Benny Hines was a customer of mine.
Where'd you know him from before that?
Benny was a boxer too. He was a boxer. He had a boxing club for a while later. He was older than I, but Benny, I think he might have even for a short period of time got into law enforcement before banking. But local family, yeah. He was in that bank. Yep. Had a car wash down through there, probably the only car wash in town on the opposite side of the street.
Still there.
Yeah. So, but then you had some motels as you're heading towards Mesa, east of McClintock, some motels that were, and trailer parks like you mentioned.
I think the car wash moved up to Broadway. It's still there
Yeah.
on Broadway. Yeah.
And drive-ins were big in those days when it started kicking in. So there was a Pioneer Drive-In, which was actually just into Mesa. Tempe did not have an actual drive-in theater itself, but everybody went to the Pioneer. It was the closest drive-in.
Did you ever hide in the trunk to get into the?
Well, the group when it got to about $1 a carload, you get as many as you could in there. Oh yeah. I don't remember having to do that at Pioneer, but we did if we got up on Thomas. I don't remember the name of that theater up there, but we did that once or twice when we got up into town and just into Scottsdale. Didn't have much reason to go to Scottsdale much back in those days, so I wasn't real familiar with Scottsdale. There was some open area between Tempe and Scottsdale.
You couldn't get there.
Yeah.
Right, there was no straight road. Scottsdale Road didn't go through.
Yeah.
So what are the drive-ins in town? We get back to the barbershops in a minute here, but remember the other drive-ins that you went to?
I remember one called the Silver Dollar.
South Central.
There was, I believe, a rodeo. Was there a rodeo?
Rodeo.
Seemed like there was one on Van Buren.
Right across from the Orange Julius.
Yeah. That one in Scottsdale that I couldn't remember the name of it, but the Pioneer. There was one in East Mesa called Sands. And there was one in Chandler that I very seldom got down there, but if you started dating somebody from Gilbert, sometimes it was closer to go to the drive-in theater. I think it was called the Mustang or something in Chandler than it was to come all the way back to Tempe, then go all the way back to Gilbert. So but yeah,
how
there
long
were
did you date
choices.
that girl? How long did you date that girl from Gilbert?
Dated her half of my junior year and all of my senior year.
And then when did you marry her?
1 month after I got out of barber college, 18 years old.
Still married to her.
April 22nd would be 56 years.
Okay, so the barbershops in Tempe at the time. You went to work for the one
At Broadway and Mill.
Broadway and Mill.
Original.
And that was owned by, what was his name again?
Tom Candelaria.
And did it have a name? Other than just
Tom, in
Candelaria's?
those days, it was Tom's Barbershop.
Tom's Barbershop.
And I don't think Tom had it for a long time either. And then he sold it.
Brand new building.
Then he sold it to Gene
Mm-hmm.
a short period of time later. And Tom got out of it. He did something else. I lost track of Tom.
Mm-hmm.
But the shop where I am now has always been Broadmoor, and it was named after the area because there's a Broadmoor School, a Broadmoor Street, Broadmoor Estates, and so my boss, instead of just saying Larry's Barbershop, decided to call it Broadmoor.
Well, I know we've had conversations about the barbershops in town over the years, you and I. Where were the other shops? And you mentioned Harold Cope just a minute ago.
At one time, Harold Cope and Ray Bowles were together in a shop just in off of University and Mill for a period of time before Tempe Center opened up. They actually worked together. I did not remember that because what I remember as a kid is going to Cope's when I was on 7th Street. But I've had several people say Ray Bowles and Harold were together.
Yeah.
Cope just down the block from there, and then Ray went into Tempe Center. Cope went down to 7th Street. I think that Bayless Center might have had a barber shop. I don't remember who would have been in there, but there was two barber shops downtown on Al Barber. I think there was Jan's Barber Shop.
On 5th Street.
Some down through there. And there was a barber shop right where, in those days, college went all the way through campus from Apache to, and there was a barber shop right across from the Catholic Church there.
On College and 8th Street.
Uh-huh.
We can't place that person. We don't know who that is.
Uh-huh.
That's who that barber was.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. Uh-huh.
So now you're in the Broadmoor barber shop. You're sitting in the 5th chair way at the back.
Oh, I was in the back because I was the rookie. Yeah. Now I'm in the front chair. I'm kind of trying to protect my interests so I don't get promoted out the front door.
Yeah. So people start coming, and now you've had these clients now for how many? Who are some of the clients that you've had? I want to ask about Gordon Core.
Gordon Core, who is a Safeway career man, was a great gentleman. He and his son both came in for years, even after Gordon left Tempe and moved out to Ahwatukee area.
Mm-hmm.
He probably came in for 30 years. He at the time I met him, he was like a buyer for Safeway. And he was very involved in things in Tempe. You probably met him through some clubs or something. Yeah. And very nice gentleman. He was in the Safeway store across the street a lot, but he was not the manager at the time that I met him. He probably was at one time at one of the stores.
Okay.
But I met Gordon Core and his son.
Well, I want to go back now. We're talking about grocery stores. We didn't talk about Rundle's grocery store. You remember Rundle's?
Down on.
Did you ever go into Rundle's on Mill
Sure.
Avenue?
Everybody went into Rundle on Mill and
northwest corner of Mill and
University. Yeah.
8th Street.
Yes, 8th Street. That's right. We're up to University yet. That's right. Yeah.
And you worked at the El Rancho Market. You've made a couple references to it.
Yes.
Who was the manager there when you were working there?
Jim. What was Jim's last name? Started with a B. Boy, I'll tell you, it would hit me because I somehow could remember him and I couldn't remember some other name. Bragdon.
Well, the managers of those grocery stores were very influential people in the town, right?
Well, there was a stabler that came later.
He was a employee like you, a bagger,
Mm-hmm.
and then a checker, and then he became He bought
Tom Stabler.
Tom Stabler. He bought it.
Yeah. So it became his store.
Mm-hmm.
It was no longer
El Rancho.
El Rancho.
Yeah.
El Rancho was owned by the Arden Mayfair Company, and the El Ranchos. There were a few of them around, but it was Tom Stabler, and his younger brother Roger Stabler was a classmate of mine. We bagged there together, and I knew his brother was working at one of the other El Rancho stores, but he ended up having that store in Tempe Center. Yes.
Well, part of what I try to do is they type these things up, and historical researchers can come through and read through this, and we'll drive them crazy with some of these references that they didn't know these people existed. Like Gordon Core, he was never in the politics of the world, but he had a very influential. He managed the Safeway warehouse in Tempe, which is a big part of it.
Sure.
You know, of the community. So you've had these kind of people running through your chair. Okay, so I started with Gordon Core. Laird, there's I suppose one of the Lairds.
Clyde Laird was a customer of mine for years. He was probably the last pharmacist at Laird Drugstore. He was downtown, and then at the end of his career, he was worked in a little small pharmacy south because the drugstore went through different names and things as Tempe went on. That gentleman and I, when he was probably in his 80s, it became, what was the name of the upstairs? It was kind of a restaurant where Hooters, and the ladies had interesting attire as they were serving her food. And Clyde was in one time, and I said, Clyde, we ought to go down to your old building and have lunch sometime. I said, it's Hooters. And he said, I've seen what's going on down there, but he said, we just kind of use the upstairs as storage. At one time, people lived up there, but he said, we just had it for storage. I said, let's go have lunch sometime to your old building. And so we went down and went up, and we ordered a sandwich and had a soda and what have you. And I said, Clyde, I said, I ought to inform the manager of who's here. This was not just your building, your daddy's building, and it was referred to as the Laird Dines building. Laird was a pharmacist, Dines was the doctor. And Clyde told me, Roger, do you know that he shortened his name to Dines? Dr. Dines shortened it when he came to Tempe. He said his name was Dingle Dines. And he said, if your name was Dingle Dines, you'd probably shorten it some way, wouldn't you? And I said, Clyde, I never ever heard that. I knew it was the Laird Dines building, but Laird was the pharmacist Dines. And I said, let me tell the manager who's here. He said, and he was such a soft-spoken, kind man that Clyde said, Roger, don't even say anything. It's not going to mean anything to any of these people. And so, but we got to go down once to Hooters with Clyde. That was fun.
So you mentioned doctors. How many doctors have you got the hair for?
Tommy Hughes. Doc Hughes was an interesting gentleman. Dr. Flynn, he wore that flat top.
Describe Tommy Hughes, and then we'll talk about Dick Flynn.
Well, Tommy Hughes, you know what? You could have a wonderful conversation with Tommy Hughes, and you didn't really feel like you were talking to a medical doctor, Tommy. He would talk about anything from bird hunting to getting out into the boonies. We always teased him because we said, Doc, you can't take all that money with you. You've acquired all this land, and you never sell anything. You just keep buying a little bit more. You can't take it with you, you know. And he drove an old International or something pickup for the longest time. He was a simple man, but he was a very interesting gentleman. He would talk about anything except medicine for the most part. I broke my wrist once, fractured, and went to Tommy Hughes when he was in the medical center just on rural there, and just down from the barbershop, almost Alameda. And I fractured it, and for years, Tommy'd come in the barbershop, and he said, he wouldn't have been nearly as good a barber if I wouldn't have taken care of that wrist for him back when. But that he had a good sense of humor, and he loved to sing. He would sit in that barbershop and just start humming and singing, and he was with some chorus group at times. So he wasn't the kind of guy that you figured that it would be Dr. Hughes and look at it medically the way you would have conversations with someone else. But Dr. Flynn, I've got the gentleman that comes in the shop now, Dr. Not Hatfield. Haywood lives on Alameda. Dr. Haywood is in his 90s. He was the doctor that was down on Mill Avenue, right behind Broadway Plaza there by Tempe Center. Dr. Haywood was the doctor that informed my wife and I that we were going to have our first child. And he comes in the barbershop, and Michelle, that schedules, is my daughter. Then I said, that's the doctor right there that informed us that that we were going to have you. So, and she's 51 years old. So, but
well, Dick's office was right across the kitty corner down the street just a little bit.
I'm sorry?
Dick's office is just a little bit further down on Mill Avenue is where he worked.
Right, right.
Did you ever, which doctor did you use besides Haywood?
Haywood was primary. We didn't have a lot of medical issues, so we didn't, but there was Dr. Axel.
Who had a son, Sherman.
Yes. What was his? Axel and there was two, they were both kind of down
Westerfeld.
Westerfeld, yeah. So we probably saw them a bit early on. We didn't have too many health problems, I guess. Optometrist was Sanchez.
George Sanchez.
George Sanchez, whose name's on the, I believe, on the district office.
CDC building
here. Great individual, yeah. But there again, there are not nearly as many. We didn't have a lot of specialists. We didn't have orthopedics, and we had optometrists, didn't have ophthalmologists yet, and what have you. So we kind of had to go into Phoenix for that, I guess. So, but we fortunately didn't need any going up. But
so who else's hair have you cut?
How about a gentleman?
Did you cut Alfred Thomas's hair?
Did not cut Alfred Thomas's hair.
Do you know where he went?
I do not know where Alfred
Thomas
Thomas
had a head of hair.
Frank Cush came into barber shop and never got a haircut, but
Really?
he brought his boys in.
Oh, okay.
I think Ray Bowles might have cut
Frank's hair.
Frank Cush. Frank signed autographs there. He brought his boys in. They didn't live far from, and that they lived in the Broadmoor area before they moved over to closer to Mill in later years. How about a gentleman by the name of Howard Pyle? Probably 20 years. I don't know how good a governor he was. He was a nice gentleman.
Who was Howard Pyle?
Howard Pyle was Tempe or Arizona's governor, early 50s. We weren't here yet. I was pretty young even when we moved here, but didn't get to know him until after he was out of the governorship. He was in the Eisenhower administration. He was something like national safety director when they started building highways.
Yeah.
And might have had more fame there than maybe when he was governor. I don't know. He said he told me once it wasn't really a flub up, Roger. He said we just didn't handle it as well as we could have. The Battle of Short Creek. He did not want multiple wives up in Colorado City in his state. He sent the National Guard out, and he said we were going to change that because they had kind of broken away from the church anyway. But he kind of said it jokingly. He says, but when we got them back here, we weren't sure what to do with them. We didn't charge them with anything, and we separated them, but it just kind of, things just kind of drifted back to what it kind of still is today. But I don't know if that had anything to do with whether he was ever reelected or not, but he was a very nice gentleman. He lived in that Broadmoor Estates area. He would walk to the shopping center and maybe go to the grocery store or something. He'd stop by the barber shop and have conversations about a lot of things other than politics. And he had that real distinct delivery because he did some radio, and he was a great individual. I really enjoyed talking to him. He was just seemed to have time for everybody, and of course he was retired by the time I met him. But it's great to have people like that. But there was I've had mayors like Harry Mitchell. I've had mayor like Hugh Hallman in my barbershop. I've had councilmen like Arredondo in my shop, Cahill. I've had, you mentioned the university. I've had deans of like the business college, Overman. And
what's your first names? Dennis Cahill, right? And Arredondo, which Arredondo?
That would be Ben, because there's a large Arredondo family.
You still cut his hair?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, still. In fact, his younger brother Rick, who was a teacher here in town, was in for a haircut today. So uh, those are families that go way back in Tempe there. uh-huh. So then there's the Loughriges. There's a couple of famous ones. Bob and Bill come in and we talk.
Oh, Bob was a classmate of yours.
Bob was in my class.
Did you know him in school?
Did not know him well because we went to different grade schools. I went to Broadmoor. He went to Payne Training. And Payne Training was a school we didn't touch on. There were more elementary schools in town than people sometimes thought, even though it was smaller. There was one high school and one junior high, but there was Thew School at the East End. There was Broadmoor, which was a new school. There was Mitchell. There was Ritter. There was Payne Training. And
There was did you
rural
mention
school.
Yeah.
There was actually a Kyrene school, but it was kind of its own little separate district, but it was just a school way out of town, you know.
Right.
So there were several grade schools. So that's where being down at Tempe Beach or at Ballpark or something, you united with some of those people that went to different grade schools. And so, but Payne Training is one that you kind of forgot about, but there were quite a few kids who went. And Mount Carmel was a Catholic school that had K through 8. So there were several different schools to go to.
So who else have you had in your chair? You have any dentists?
Well.
How about Monty? Did you cut Monty's hair?
No, didn't cut.
How about the meetings that were taking place at Monty's? Do you remember your guys talking about
group
those?
there were a group of people that got together down there. Pyle would have been one of them. There was a gentleman by the name of Red Ford. That was I don't know, what was his first name? He was a teacher at Phoenix Union and what have you. Lived over and across from Safeway there. Wayne Ford. And a lot of people call him Red Ford. He had red hair, I guess, at one time. But who else got together? There was a group.
Tommy Hughes.
Hughes was one of them. I think they got together with down there, and Monty, and
there was a preacher.
Might have been Hayden.
Hayden. Okay, yeah.
So
these were Tempe businessmen and professionals.
Yeah.
We get together and talk about how to run Tempe.
Well, that's and sometimes that's why you need neighborhood barbershops to survive. So you get some of the history. That's why I've told my grandsons that work in there that are 30 years old. I said, listen to some of these stories, because I said, you'll be telling them sometime about some of these people that your granddad or that you barely met that were part of Tempe growing up and very, very involved with things. But a lot of somebody once asked me, they said, who's the most famous person hair you've cut, Roger? I said, well, and he was serious. I said, well, you know what? You think about it, whether you could say a governor's hair, you could say a mayor's hair, you could say a dean's hair, you could say a doctor's hair. And I've cut a Cy Young Award winner's hair, Jim Longboard with the Boston Red Sox. He was out here for spring training, cut his hair twice, so it wasn't like it was long term. And cut a professional basketball player's hair, who is retired now, Art Becker, who played in the ABA when there were 2 professional leagues. He still comes in. But to answer the guy's question, I said, you know what? Who's the most famous person I've cut? I said, you. Because I said, I see you every month for how many decades? So I said, you're the most famous. So, yeah. But it's been a great run, and because of the family operation and my grandsons being there and doing a good job, I feel like it's really never been hard for me to get up and go to work, and it's easier now. I come down and see my friends we talk about this and that. A lot of there's more gray hair under my chair than there is dark hair. That's the east end of the shop with my boys. But some of the best stories come out of the front chair.
So is it true, Roger, that you have a distillery, a sour mash distillery in the back of your truck, in the back of your shop?
No. We
you
don't have Thursday night poker games either.
No?
There has been an adult beverage available, not during business hours, but there's an adult beverage has been consumed when somebody had something to talk about. But that's not on any kind of regular basis. So
how about there's some characters I want to talk about. Carl, remember Carl, the guy from the apartments across the street? What was Carl's last name? He used to come in there all the time.
Well, not Carl, but George.
George, I'm sorry. Yeah.
George Bustamante. George Bustamante, his son owned the apartment complex, bought it. He lived in California, and his mom and dad had the apartment complex. Their apartment, they had I don't know if it was a back bedroom window or whatever, faced Rural Road in the complex. And when he saw my old van pull in there, he'd come over every single day. And he would sit there and just tell stories. And then it got very comical. There was almost a team. One of his tenants lived there, and he was always a month and a half behind on rent. And they would go back and forth. And the other guy was very sharp, and he would get critical of George not fixing the drippy faucet. And George would remind him, you're a month and a half behind on rent. And customers would just sit there and smile and listen to these guys. It was, and they weren't really vicious with each other. And but George would come over every single day. He would drink half a Dr. Pepper and leave it open in the refrigerator. Because he was diabetic, and he was coming over, so he didn't want his wife to know that he was sneaking some sugar in. And he'd come back in the afternoon after he went home and took his nap. He'd come back in the afternoon, have the other half, and visit some more. So he was there every single day. He was one of the guys that just came in the shop. And characters that I remember as a kid downtown was Yuli and Johnny. Both Hispanic gentlemen that were just kind of town characters. They were just there. They would. Everybody knew them. They were friendly with people. I remember Johnny would turn bottles in at El Rancho and for change, what have you. But they were very friendly. I never knew much about where they lived. I just assumed it was maybe west of Mill Avenue, down 1st, 2nd Street, somewhere down through there. But when you start talking about town characters, you had a few of those in town. Yeah.
How about professors from Arizona State University? You ever cut any of their hair?
Well, Dean Overman, Bill Loughrige was in business college. Cut my dad's hair, who ended up being a professor at the university. I reminded my dad, he said, you know what? It cost me more to put you through barber school, buying tools and tuition and what have you, where you could have gone to Arizona State for practically nothing with your parents working there. Your brother went through 4 years of college and got a master's degree, and it cost less money to put him through college than it did you through barber school. But later I said, Dad, it was a pretty good investment. I said, you haven't paid for a haircut in 30 years. So I said, it turned out to be a pretty good investment, didn't it? So, coaches, I don't know why they called him, because he had a full head of hair. Baldy Castillo, who was the track coach, came in.
Zuko?
Coach Zuko was a customer of mine. John Zuko.
Yeah, and describe who Zuko was.
Zuko was when I got to Tempe High, he had previously been a football coach at one time, but when I got there, he was the track coach along with, we just call him Chief Wind, Coach Wind. And Zuko, everybody liked Zuko. He was just a pleasant guy. He could be stern on things, but he was just a very pleasant gentleman. And he came out here from Boston, and played on ASU's football team. He was actually recruited out by Doherty, who was the coach back in those days. And he never lost completely that East Coast accent, even though he was here for forever. And he came in for decades. Coach Zuko was a great individual. Mr. Boyle never came in, the principal, but his son Jim was a classmate of mine. So but we've connected with the Bristols. I've got a 5-generation family that comes in. The kids are down to this now.
Who's that?
Bristol was the name. He ended up being he was a teacher at Tempe High in the 60s, and then he went to Mesa Community College when it opened up, and his remainder of his career was over at Mesa Community College. And both of his sons got into education. One taught at Stan, there was a classmate of mine, and your brothers taught at Corona, and his son teaches out at Desert Vista. So a lot of those families, in order to get 5 generations of families in there, people have to stay put. Because a lot of people get their educations and then they're off to jobs in Colorado or whatever. But
how about Roy Coppinger?
Coppinger, well, I did not cut his hair. He was, I knew Mr.
You knew
Coppinger.
who he was, yeah.
Yeah, But probably the gentleman that I really appreciated most, that's been as much impact in Tempe is Mr. Sperkelli. Everybody, I never called him Joe, but he's a great individual. I've got a guy coming in tomorrow that was a classmate of his, so he's got to be 92 or 3 years old. That was a classmate of Joe's growing up. His name's Heilman, and he lived down on 8th Street near where the old creamery was, where Four Peaks Brewery is now. He lived across the street there growing up, and when he came in the shop, I had never. The name didn't ring a bell, but he said, "Well, Roger, he said I was in the service for 35 years, and when I went in the service, it was a career, and I was all over. When I came back to Tempe, I lived on Hudson Lane, down from where you said you lived. But then when we retired, we moved to East Mesa at Las Sendas, and so he moved back. When the first time I met him, when he was 90 years old, he moved into Mirabella, the old folks home on the corner there.
And old folks, like you're not old.
Yeah, I'm getting there. I'll be the house barber one of these days there. But he talked about it. He said, I'm right back to where I went to high school, which was where Tempe High was prior to its location. I was down there, and he said I was a classmate of Joe Sperkelli's, and so he said we went through school together. So, but a lot of famous people. But it's been fun, and I'll continue doing this because I've adjusted my hours slightly. I don't work as many hours, but I have no trouble getting up, coming to work, and seeing people. That's what, even though I don't reside in Tempe. When we bought a home, it's kind of like now. Comparable home costs a little bit more in Tempe than it did in Mesa. So in 1971, we bought our typical salt block home, about like Canal and Suggsville over Mesa, about a 1,800 square foot house. You could buy it for a couple $1,000s less than Tempe. So we bought a starter home in 1971, and we're still in it. So I'm a guy that drives older cars, kept a wife for 56 years, stayed in a barber shop for 56 years, and had the same house for 50 years plus. So some people would want more variety than that. Not necessarily wives, but houses or whatever. But it's worked for us, and so I'll be part of Tempe forever because I know more about what's going on in Tempe, just being in business and meeting people here, and so it's. We always thought we'd move back to Tempe and just settled in and didn't, but the business has kept me connected with all these people. So.
Well, Roger, I thank you. You've been sitting here more than an hour, and do you have any notes in there that we didn't cover?
I don't know that we. Probably not. You asked all the good questions, man. I just meant about what we, my journey here. Talked about Baldy Castillo. I never knew what Baldy's first name was. Coach Castillo.
Coach.
A lot of times it's Coach Kajikawa. To me, that was Mr. ASU was Bill Kajikawa. I mean, his whole life
cut
was.
His hair?
I didn't regularly, but I had.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. He was an institution.
Yeah. I got introduced to him from a gentleman by the name of Gene Corno that lived by him, and he brought him in one time. But one of the stores in that Tempe Center was the Americana Men's Shop, and there was a Grant's.
Yeah.
And then first 31 flavors ice cream was down at the end cap.
That's where you spent your money as a carry-out boy. Right?
Yeah.
Did you do anything in that El Rancho besides carry out groceries, or did you work in the produce or work in the meat department at all?
No.
Stock shelves?
Strictly high school. While I was in Barber College, I actually stayed there working, carrying out. So it was my probably almost 4 years. Worked at that store. That was good. And of course, it wasn't very far from 10th and Farmer. So just up the road.
What's been interesting, you've mentioned a couple of things that I've tried to bring people into the Mexican food restaurant that, nobody remembers that place.
Yeah.
And that was the only really restaurant. Mikhail, do you have any questions?
I do. I don't know much about barbershops, but
I don't know why.
Well, you can come down and hang out anytime you want. Michelle's there in the mornings. You might, if you want more comfortable with another female there.
Women seem to talk though to their hairstylist, right? I assume it's the same for barbershops. So do you feel like you're the keeper of secrets, or that you've given advice to people that have sat in your chair over the years? And
well,
can you, without blowing into confidentiality,
you've had people that have opened up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in the environments you're talking about, whether it's male or female, it is an area where people seem to be more comfortable about talking. You can get into some politics without having it get heated. Mm-hmm. And where people might not even mention that if they were in another environment, and you get a little back and forth. Now, me personally, I'm the kind of guy that sometimes if it gets too quiet in there, I'll just open up something that might be controversial and let him go back and forth. I'm kind of an instigator sometimes on that. But I back off. But as far as advice goes, I probably haven't given the best advice to people, but sometimes people just want to talk, and you just let them go on about something. If they're feeling comfortable about doing that on something that could be semi-private, I appreciate the fact that I've got a platform for them to be able to do that, and if they feel better about it later, that's...
So you get to be the listener.
Yeah, but it's, there again, it's more likely to have that in what I would consider a neighborhood barbershop where people are regulars than maybe in some of the supercut, great cut type places. A lot of my customers have less hair now than they once did. Most of them aren't like Bill. So
the haircut's not
it may be it doesn't take long to cut hair, but it takes us 30 minutes to talk about things after the haircut while they're still in the chair. See, so.
Okay. Were there other places around the valley or the state that you went with your family on day trips, or the zoo or the botanical gardens? I don't know what was.
Well, yeah, all that was
camping.
All that was new stuff. Was like the zoo. I think Maytag name was early on.
Yes.
And with that, there was a place called Legend City that became popular when we were about in high school. With my dad being a teacher, we did take trips. He loved to go to places like Yosemite, and we went up into Nevada a lot, up into Utah. things that I wasn't able to do quite as much with my family, because with a small business, our weekends are kind of Sunday, Monday, and so sometimes I just take a day off. But we'd tour Arizona more than we did go on long trips. But we enjoyed getting out. Arizona's got a lot to offer on variety, and I've never been to Europe. My daughter went to school in New York State, but I've never been to New York City. She went to school in Albany. Little desert rat found out what upstate New York is like in the winter. We weren't sure if she was going to finish, but she did. So it was, it's Arizona's home, and it's going to be. My family has all stayed intact, and so we'll be here a long time.
You mentioned Jerry Brock earlier, and you probably know Jerry already has his headstone up at Tempe Bellevue
Oh, yeah.
Cemetery.
Jerry did that with his Ford, the one that is his pride and joy.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jerry's had some health problems recently, but he's very particular about his hair. He always looks very smooth. He's got but he's. I can remember going to his. Well, in those days we call it junkyard, salvage yard, when it was on Apache and McClintock. In those days, you didn't have an underpass, you had an overpass, viaduct, I guess we call it. And their operation got large enough where they had salvaged cars on either side. So if you needed a radiator or you needed something, you went to, it was called B&B. His father was Brock, and Jerry and I can't talk much about Tempe High because Jerry says, Roger, I quit high school as a freshman. I was there weeks, not months. So you talk about coach this or teacher this.
Nope.
I quit school and went to work at the shop and stayed there.
He was the Fonzie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we interviewed Jerry for this project too.
Yeah, he's an interesting gentleman, and he's got that restored tow truck that he's parked at the barber shop a couple times when we've had a car show or two, and told stories about that. He's a great innovator. He's been super involved in things in Tempe. Monday night, I see a tribute to him on Channel 8 on the Antique Roadshow.
Oh, really?
So it says, evidently, it says the Jerry Brock Foundation probably makes a donation to Channel 8.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
But it shows a picture of down at Tempe Beach of, doesn't show him, it shows the vehicle and the bridge and the beach in the background. Oh yeah, Jerry Brock's. We failed to mention him.
You mentioned him. We just talked about him.
He's very important guy in the community. So you lose some of those people, and that's when I've found myself in recent years, maybe going to a few more funerals than you like. That's when you see a lot of people that turn out for people that have been in the community so long. But as time marches on, that's what you go through. But that's why those individuals are so important in having this sort of thing as a tribute to them, because they remember about the way things were and been very involved in Tempe. So.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm going to go back to Alfred Thomas, and we just touched on him a couple of times, but can you describe who Alfred Thomas was and what he became?
He was a big man. I remember, tall man. He was I would say he was probably director of admissions. And I can remember when we'd go down College Avenue and pick Mom up, but she'd come out a long walkway from the administration office on the west side of College. And I only saw him on occasion when we actually went into her offices. Then she got into graduate admissions, which I'm not sure if that separated her from him or not, but I didn't ever really conversed with him. He didn't come into the barbershop, but she admired him. She was a great person to work for, she said. So I don't know when he started there. He was there in the 50s when we came.
I went to paint training school, and he was the registrar in the 50s when I was in grade school. His wife was the music teacher at paint training school.
Okay.
And then he became the historical historian, I believe, at ASU. So he was, you know, he was a big man on campus, and a very nice man, a very nice man. Mm-hmm. I didn't know if you knew him. His wife, your wife knew him.
No, I did not. I did not know him that well, other than being.
Okay. Well, thanks, Roger, for sitting here with us and doing that.
Right.
I think it's great because you, like I say, the historians, as they want to go through these things, I think you've given them enough detail that they can say, hey, okay, and it's important to be able to categorize these things, and
sure,
and because it is the foundation for what Tempe is.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we were a little part of it.
Thanks.
I got when I renewed my shop license this last year, they said down there, they said our records show, Roger, that you're the longest continuous operating barber in Tempe.
Oh my gosh.
And
well, you figure, yeah, Ray Bowles is gone, and
so
he was the only one to be longer, right? He or Harold Cope, and Cope's was gone a long time.
And they started adding up the years as far as current, you know.
Right.
So I said, well, I never thought about it. I said, because there are so many barbers, younger barbers in town that I don't know anymore.
Right.
The boys might know them more than I might have gone to school with them, whatever. But I said that probably doesn't get me a statue or anything, does it? And they said, no, bragging rights. They said, that's about it. And that's when I mentioned about Ray Bowles. I said, Roger Gil is no Ray Bowles. And one of the guys down there said, who said Ray Bowles? He was an old timer. And I said, well, he was more of an institution in Tempe than maybe Roger, but all I've done is contribute my share. So.
Yeah, Ray's Barbershop.
Yeah.
Broadmoor, right.
Yeah. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you
So
much.
now you folks, let me ask you about you folks. So you do these interviews with, how do you recruit? Other than
I got involved by bumping into Mike in the aisle of the Fry's grocery store. We were complaining because we couldn't get the kind of soda pop we wanted because they were all sold out.
Yeah.
I was doing something for the foster kids,
Uh-huh.
and he starts yakking about he was doing this thing for the history. And I asked him, how long you been in Tempe? He says, oh, I've been here since like 1995.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
oh, really?
Well, the couple that I met was at the Veterans Day parade.
Same guy.
And they talked to me, and they took some information, and that. But with everything going on that day, since we were doing the parade, I didn't remember the names and what have you. And then and then you kind of reconnected when you mentioned something.
Well, she called me.
Uh-huh.
Said, you know Roger Gil?
Yeah. Uh-huh. So
Yeah.
you folks are Tempe folks?
Yeah, I live in Tempe. Yeah.
I'm down at Warner McClintock's, no?
Uh-huh.
Down by where that.
She's down in
school was.
Kyrene.
Oh, yeah.
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 Guadalupe and McClintock.
God, what was the superintendent's name? Ben?
In Kyrene or Tempe?
Kyrene. Ben, he was
Ben
actually
Furlong?
Furlong.
Uh-huh. Yeah, we interviewed him too early on.
Yeah.
Michelle Hirsch does a lot of our interviews. She's good friends with
Is
him.
Ben alive?
Uh-huh.
Or he was.
He moved to Prescott or something.
He did, but he came back. He tells us about it in the interview about a year and a half ago. He said,
Wow.
I came back to Tempe on purpose to be in Tempe.
I did not know that.
Uh-huh.
Ben Furlong.
Well, one of the formats that could be used is like you and I or somebody that could sit down and talk about it, and because they'll generate more thoughts about, oh my gosh, because you didn't even mention the grapefruit factory over there on 8th Street, which is right around the corner from you, stuck to your neighborhood.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you mentioned the
Well, I'll think of
McElhaney-
things after we leave here.
you mentioned the McElhaney feedlot. I mean, we were all covered with that
I think
the
about
dust.
that sometimes when you go to San Diego. You're going down from
Oh, yeah, they
beyond
have-
Gila Bend. You look over there. It's probably McElhaney down to a grandchild now.
Yeah.
But you'll see. I'll think back about the fact that because we'd hop the fence because our back of our fence butted up to the railroad tracks. On the other side of the railroad tracks was a feedlot. So my brother and I and a couple other friends, we'd hop up on the haystacks and get those cattle moving a little bit. And here come one of the employees running us out of there, and we'd hop back over the fence. But it was all open back
Running
then.
that weight off those cows.
Yeah. We'd get up on that viaduct, that overpass on bicycles. And it wasn't designed for pedestrians. It was narrow with two cars.
Two ribbon
We'd
road,
get
yeah.
up at the top and we went down on our bicycles on the south side more than the north side because there
you
was
wanted to get to
less.
Apache.
Yeah, you get towards Apache, there's too much traffic.
Yeah,
But
some
we
lady with her car full of kids ran down
I
off
often
that
wondered
into-
why they made that so high because all you had to do was have it seemed higher maybe as a kid because all you had to do is make it high enough for the train to get through, but it was up there a ways. Yeah, that was fun. Yeah. Moving sheep down through the roadways back then, you know.
Yeah. Sheep would graze on the alfalfa fields or whatever they had
Yeah.
in town. They still do it, but it's out in the middle of the state now.
Yeah.
And you can still see that they have sheep, but they put them in a truck now. They don't drive them.
Yeah.
They don't use the bridge at Blue Point. Right?
So I don't want to take all the credit on this because Benny and Greg are still cutting hair. Benny in South Scottsdale, they got the scholarship. Greg down in Oro Valley.
Oh, really?
And so based on someone,
Yeah, but you stayed put.
I stayed put.
Yeah, you got your anchor down.
Yep. So anyway,
Thank you so much.
thank you.
Thanks, Roger.